Great, thanks, Mark. Great, thanks, Mark. Appreciate you allowing us the opportunity to present a PowerPoint on Colorado residential native landscapes. I'm kind of here in cahoots with Beth Lewis, who lives in your neighborhood and is also very passionate about the work that we do, and we're in some ways highlighting a project that we did at her house. So I'd invite Beth to chime in whenever she deems it appropriate here, because she's basically one of you guys and knows at this point almost as much as I do, I think, maybe more. So welcome Beth's input. But here's I'm going to start this out. So in overview, what I take to be the goal here is to present some ideas, some big picture and maybe small picture options for the residents in your neighborhood to find sustainability. I know that it can be a daunting idea or task to feel like any one individual can make a big difference when it comes to climate change or making this world, undoing some of the wrongs that maybe we've done or the damage that we've done to the environment. But if you own a home and you have some land, even if it's a very small amount of space, you can make a difference. And I know that for me personally, that feels empowering because, like I said, in the big picture, I've got to drive a car. I've got to do things that I know aren't carbon neutral or good for the earth. Try to do my best on the flip side to make up for that and maybe even do more. So that's why we're dedicating some of our work to sustainably minded projects. So this is Beth's home. On the left, you can see what Beth had before we started. Now, I imagine that there's been some plantings here that Beth, you can speak to this. I don't know if all those plantings are what the HOA, what the developer delivered to you, or if you had made some adjustments.
Everything was planted by the builder except for the two small trees in the parkway on the right-hand side.
Okay. So it's a, in my humble opinion, it's a pretty good example of what is pretty well understood as landscaping, but pretty egregious in terms of its benefit to the world. So we've got a lot of, we're looking at, if you include the tree lawn space between the sidewalk and the street, we've got close to somewhere between 80 and 90% a monoculture of Kentucky bluegrass. And then we've got some other plants, not very many of which are from this region. So I'm starting off kind of on the wrong foot here, but it gives us an opportunity to develop something that ends up what is on the right. So you can see we're going to end up with a landscape. Now you have to take for granted that we've got a lot of plants in this space. They're small, and that's okay because what we've done to prepare this site will allow these plants to establish and flourish very quickly. But you can see we're left with nothing like what's on the left here. The finished product, although this is only about 1 month in after planting, looks very different, and that can be challenging for some folks. The stark difference between a traditional landscape and one that's maybe more thought out and has different goals. So what do we do to this site? Well, first of all, we increased the number of native plantings, which, without going into too much depth, does a lot of benefit for your site. It's I think more beautiful. There's a lot more texture. There's a cycle in a symphony of colors. It will invite pollinators, and pollination is a big hot topic right now. So this will exponentially increase the number of insects that are invited to this landscape. We've reduced the amount of water that needs to be input into this landscape very, very drastically. we get some free stuff from Mother Nature, but we can't really rely on that. And so we've always supplemented our landscapes with water. How much that this landscape needs moving down the road is maybe on the order of 10% of what that traditional landscape would have needed, just to take a guess off the cuff. Not only that, but the water that we are using, we're distributing into the landscape far more efficiently. We've increased the permeability of the site. We're legally and intelligently harvesting rainwater here, not catching it into barrels, but allowing it to penetrate into the ground, into this landscape where it can be most beneficial. And we're increasing the diversity of plants, which makes it more interesting throughout the seasons. You might ask, why native instead of, why can't we bring plants like Shasta daisy and roses and things like that are pretty standard plants for the East Coast? Why would we think that natives were important here? Well, one, they need less water. They're gonna thrive and survive much more adeptly with our harsh sun conditions, light conditions, temperature swings, hail cycle. I know it's hard to take my word for granted, but I had a client that really insisted on having a cottage garden, so it was full of plants like our gardens are, but not full of native plants. And we happened to get a heavy hailstorm that summer and it decimated her garden. And she came back to me and said, well, now I realize why you were pushing plants that are adapted to this environment. It was tragic for her, but it was a hard learned lesson. Native plants will sequester more carbon. We'll get to a slide here shortly that shows that. And it's also important to know that most insects are specialists. So you think of now a traditional honeybee is not a native insect to this area, but there are a lot of bee species, wasps, moths, the whole gamut of insects. They do not pollinate every plant. They're looking for one or a few specific plants to pollinate. So if we have a desert in terms of plants for those pollinators, and they're not finding the things that they need, their populations will decline. It's just a supply and demand situation where we don't provide that food, then those insects will not thrive.
Can I just chime in here?
Yeah.
So I wrote the part in this slide that said 90% of insects are plant specialists. It's 90% of insect herbivores, just to be clear for anybody who's into that. So the insects that consume plants, they eat leaves, eat parts of stem and things like that. Those insects have co-evolved over thousands of years with specific plants. Most people know the monarch has gotten a lot of attention this last year, and monarchs are specialized to milkweeds. So just like that, there's a ton of insects that are, they're young, or the adults consume the plants, and they specialize to specific ones.
Yeah. Thanks, Beth. And it's also important to understand that even very small spaces that can connect corridors, these biological corridors can go a long way in terms of protecting those species. So you don't have to have a large space to make an impact, is basically the takeaway here. Yeah, the stat on how many acres of land is covered by Kentucky bluegrass is pretty staggering. I don't have the number off the top of my head, but it is.
I do.
Yeah, what is it?
It's 40 million acres, which is the most irrigated crop in the United States, and we don't eat it. So it's more than corn, and we're growing a lot of lawn.
Yeah, that's astounding. And then,
Beth, any idea how that translates to the Central Park neighborhood in terms of percentages?
I don't. I've never looked at that. But I think where the opportunity is, especially for Central Park residents, is that a lot of us have smaller spaces than a lot of Denver or even the Front Range for grass. So it becomes a more feasible thing to work on, in my mind.
Yeah, I'm part of a 96, let's call it 100 home HOA. And so my mission here is to find out how we can like reduce our water, but make this happen. But it's an upward battle. I'll say that. I'm convinced, but
Yeah. And can you, how do you pronounce your name? I don't want to. Lilia?
Lilia, yes.
Lilia. Lilia, I've got some experience in working with HOAs, and I'm a firm believer that the economics have to work, or there's not a lot of tolerance for, like, on an HOA level for a feel-good project. You know,
Yeah,
you've gotta-
I'll be very honest. What's killing us now is we have a sprinkler system that went in between 04 and 06.
Okay.
And
and maybe
it's,
not very well installed.
I mean, we have to water our grass to get our trees water. Okay.
Okay.
It's really awful. And the HOA actually pays the water bill.
Right.
So that's sort of our hang is, because we're paying Denver drinking water rates for irrigation.
Mhm.
And I'm hoping that that's going to be enough to swing a little difference. I'll get off my soapbox. I was just kind of,
Well,
I'm just curious because I mean, this you know, Central Park is sort of this oasis kind of thing. And I'm looking at what you're talking about. And if you just multiply that across the entire plat, it would be an amazing contribution.
well, you are preaching to the choir, and
Yeah.
and
And I'll stop
potentially
preaching. I'll let you preach.
no. Well, I just want to offer that maybe there's a follow-up conversation with that is more specific to your HOA.
Oh, yeah.
and
Totally.
I'm open to that. Just so you know.
Thank you, Curtis.
But we do have a lot of slides to fly through. So chip in and chime in when you've got questions. And if it's sort of a more site specific individual question, let's hang tight till the end. And okay, we talked about carbon sequestration, and this is a pretty good example. On the far left, you can see the root zone of Kentucky bluegrass. Now, technically, Kentucky bluegrass roots have been shown to grow up to 17 inches, which would be about, can you guys see my cursor on the screen?
Yes, yeah, we can see it.
Okay, so this would be about where I would say maybe in an Ohio landscape that has about 12 inches of topsoil, you know, that plant's roots would grow to about this level, which still looks minute in comparison to what these native plant root systems are really doing. Not only is there a lot of carbon in these roots, but they thrive and die back and grow deeper and then die back, and it brings organic matter deeper into the soil. So it improves the soil health all the way across this soil profile, all the way down to what are we looking at? 15 feet for some of these plants. It's pretty incredible. And it makes Kentucky bluegrass look like it's really not doing much at all to help the bigger picture ecology of the site. So we want to talk, I like to bring up the question. We talk about native plants, but I feel like there's a fairly decent misunderstanding about what that really means. So when I ask the question, when I give presentations like this, I always ask the question, what is a native plant? Is it native to, you know, Earth? Is it native to North America? Is it native to the United States? Is it native to Colorado? And that's a good start. You know, your area is kind of right around here. You can see the topographical diversity of our state. You know, we've got really dry portions of our state. We've got the Rocky Mountains, the Continental Divide. We've got the foothills. You know, we've got Denver. Are native plants native to this landscape? I mean, I think sadly, there are very few plants left in any ecological corridor here that are truly native to that space. So I like to break down what native plant communities look like in Colorado, just to help understand that native is sort of like a term. It's like going to the grocery store and you find something labeled natural, right? What does that mean? It doesn't really mean anything. It's just a sales gimmick. So I want you to be educated when you go into a nursery or when you're starting to do research on which plants to use in your landscape. Think about this in a bigger picture. So we've got the alpine and tundra landscape. We're talking about elevations over 11,500 feet. There aren't a lot of plants that grow in that community. So you're probably not picking many things that are actually native to that ecosystem. Then we got subalpine, so 10,000 to 11,500 foot elevations. We do have some spruce and some fir that grow there. We also get a lot more precipitation in that ecosystem. So if this is an ecosystem that you want to replicate in your landscape, you will have to water quite a bit more. Anybody know the average rainfall in the Denver metro area is about 17 inches a year. Now that average is really a difficult number to rely on. We know that some years we get as little as 10, 11, 12 inches. And then some years, I mean, there was a year in 2013, or was it 2013 or 2014, we got that much water in 5 hours, right? We had some serious flooding. So using an average rainfall for this region as a metric to design landscapes is kind of challenging. But let's just say on an average year, you'd need to more than double the amount of annual rainfall we got in order to support this landscape. Montane, now we're talking foothills. This is 8,000 to 10,000 foot elevations. Quite a few more conifers, ponderosa pine and aspens, things like that. That's the ecosystem that aspens are native to. Sorry, that's above the foothills. Let me jump to foothills. This is like above Boulder. This is Chautauqua Park. 6,000 to 8,000 foot elevations. A lot of plants here that work in our not foothills environment, but can be brought down. They do need a little bit more irrigation than what we get naturally. A lot of shrubs come from that ecosystem. Where you guys live and where I live is in the plains or the eastern prairie, which is typically a short grass prairie. We've got two prairie ecosystems in this country, short grass and tall grass. They're basically defined by the amount of precipitation that ecosystem receives. So obviously we live in a more arid climate. So our prairie system is a short grass prairie. It doesn't sustain plants that can grow taller than what the native short grasses that thrive in this area. That lower amount of water is what makes it a short grass prairie versus a tall grass prairie. Tall grass prairie is out maybe Minnesota along the Mississippi River, where we get a lot more rain. Our native landscape is predominantly grassland. Okay. And like I said, we've got an average approximately of 12 to 18 inches of precipitation a year, which that's what we get. And that's what we can sort of rely on. Then the last ecosystem, very interesting one, lower than 6,000 foot elevations. This is like the desert Southwest, where we're getting much less water, half as much water, possibly. These are desert ecosystems. where water comes hard and fast, but very infrequently. The soils are very inorganic. A lot of it's decomposed rock, and a totally different group of plants. So what I'm trying to get at here is it can be challenging to go to a nursery and go to the native plant section and know that you can't necessarily plant a sagebrush with an aspen. You know, even though both of those plants are what many would consider native, they're just native to such different ecosystems that if you give the conditions to one of those plants that are optimal, the other will not be happy. So it takes a little bit of homework. That's important. If you wanted to create a desert Southwest garden, man, go for it. It fits the sustainability goals of reducing irrigation, but it would mean you'd need to do some soil modification, and you'd need to be very careful about which plants you picked to grow in that environment. The Pawnee Buttes National Grassland is one of two remaining national grasslands that has been undeveloped. It's pretty hard to wrap your head around the fact that we have basically either farmed or developed almost all of the continuous United States, aside from the mountains and the forests. But any sort of buildable flat-ish space has by and large been eaten up by farming or development. There's two national grasslands left. One of them we're lucky enough to have in northeastern Colorado. It's called the Pawnee Buttes National Grassland. And this is a pretty good model of what our landscape looked like before we changed it. You know, this was a springtime camping trip that I did there. And this is one of the two buttes. You can see the plant communities here. There are a lot of different plants, but one thing I want you to notice in this photo, how much soil do you see in this photo? You see none. And that's important to understand, that Mother Nature fills an empty space. In this photo, we do have a few empty spaces, but we've got a lot of texture. We have things coming into bloom, a mixture of grasses and flowering forbs or perennials. So this, for me, as a plant nerd, this is inspiration. There's a really cool grouping of yuccas here that form a drift or an accent. There are some flowering things. There's lots of low growing ground covers. And then you step back and think, wow, the roots of that plant may grow 10 feet into the ground. It's quite mind-boggling. Some other things that I think are really cool: sand cherry, some native yarrow. Plants can thrive in the craziest situations. This is like a really steep embankment. How a seed of this plant landed here and this plant started to thrive is fun. It's fun to kind of think about. Do we get flowers? Yes. A native phlox, a yucca. So in a typical shortgrass prairie, the plant mixture is about 80% grasses and sedges. Sedges, most folks wouldn't know the difference between a grass or a sedge. They look very similar, although botanically they're quite different. And then 20% are forbs, or perennial wildflowers and bulbs and things like that. Do I think that that's a mixture that works for most residential homeowners? Most, no. So what we try to do is flip that equation upside down. We try to plant about 80% flowering things and 20%-ish grasses. Very close to you is Rocky Mountain Arsenal. It's another very natural space. This is what a shortgrass prairie does and sustains. And these bison are quite incredible. There's a synergy between the animals and the plants in this space. The animals, quote unquote, mow the grasses down. They trample the ground, which puts depression in the ground where seeds can fall and then potentially harvest rainwater on a micro scale. They defecate into this landscape. So they basically fertilize it. And as a result of that action, the grasses thrive. Now, I haven't yet seen the viability of bringing bison into a residential landscape to help do maintenance, but let's think along those lines. Mother Nature has solved these problems, and they have delivered the answers that we need to replicate. So is the lawnmower the right replication of this natural process? Sort of, right? But sort of not. You know, it's really quite harmful to be running a lawnmower. Okay, so if you are feeling so inclined to make a change in your landscape, there's some processes and there's some steps that I would encourage you to bison would definitely slow drivers down. That wouldn't hurt. You could also leave your lawnmower in the middle of the street and see what happens. That would slow folks down too. So here, I want to outline some steps. The number one question you need to ask is, how do you intend to use the space? So if you can harken back to the first slide, Beth and her husband had decided that their front yard was a good space to dedicate to the ecosystem and the health of their plot on this earth. And so it wasn't about getting out there and running around, kicking the soccer ball around, rolling around with your dog. It wasn't about harvesting food. It was about creating a landscape that was good for the ecosystem. So that was good to identify that goal and then implement a solution that meets those needs. Those may not be exactly your needs. Maybe you want a garden that is good for the ecosystem, but it's also a retreat space. So you put a small patio there or a bench. There's lots of different ways to go here. I would even say that removing Kentucky bluegrass lawn and replacing it with a native grass species lawn, even if it's still a monoculture, is better than the inputs that are required for Kentucky bluegrass as a plant. So everybody has to determine what their comfort level is and what their aesthetic needs are and what their usage of the space is. So things you want to consider in your specific space. What's the sun exposure? Sunny, shady, wind exposure? Do you have some slope, or is there some grade to that space? You know, you have to understand that water will always run downhill. So the bottom of a slope will always be wetter than the top, and that's going to affect how you handle that landscape, what type of soil you have. Other elements that might remain is there a sidewalk that goes to your front door that you will not remove? Or is there a tree that's been planted that's healthy and fits into your bigger goals and you might leave that? Do you have views that you want to retain or maybe block? And then I would recommend researching some plants that you think would thrive in your environment. This is not an exercise into, hey, can I grow a Japanese maple in my landscape? Nobody wins an award for that. This is about what plants need the least amount of input for the most amount of return. What are going to be enjoyable for you as homeowners to look at, for the visitors to your home, for the passersby, and then for the natural world to use. Look at gardens that you like and might like to replicate. Inspiration doesn't come to everybody. Sometimes copying is a great way to go. You don't always have to reinvent the wheel. What do they say? Duplication is the biggest form of flattery. Something like, isn't that? There's some saying. Get some books on native landscapes or look at demonstration gardens or do some research. There's a lot of, the Colorado Native Plant Society has a great website. And from there, it's lots of rabbit holes. You can spend days just diving deep into the internet on things that are very Colorado specific. Then what sort of feeling are you trying to create? Invitation, awe, drama? Those are just 3 options. There's probably lots more. And then you want to think about, so you've done some thinking, you've done some planning, maybe you've done a little bit of putting ideas on paper. Most of you live in relatively new HOAs, so I would consider those HOA development projects. That would be different than going into, say, for instance, the Highlands in Denver and changing a landscape there. Those are pretty different projects, and I'll explain why. And then, are you looking to kind of do a complete renovation where you take an entire front yard and change it? Or are you planning to take it piece by piece, one small area at a time? There's no right or wrong answer. So if you've got an HOA development, you've got probably unpredictable soils. Now think about the soil that you have could very likely be the material that came out of the basement dig at your neighbor's home, right? So it might be soil that was originally 10 feet below ground, and it's absolutely devoid of life. There's no microbiological activity. There were no plant roots down there. There was nothing going on. It's a pretty poor medium to start a garden. Plants aren't going to be super thrilled with you for sticking them in that ground. So you may want to do some things. We like to, in a lot of cases, remove 6 inches of soil, bring in some material to amend the subgrade, and then import good soil to start off with as perfect as possible, an environment that allows plants to thrive as quickly and as healthfully as possible. So we use something called expanded shale. And it's really important to not cheap out on the imported material. Getting topsoil from a vendor is not good. It's going to come with a lot of weed seed in it. So you've got to do some homework that you bring in the good stuff. If it's an established landscape, like for instance the Highlands, generally those soils are healthy because they've been sustaining gardens for at least 50 years. A lot of times there's too much soil, so you may need to excavate some soil and remove it just to get to the correct grade. And then oftentimes there's a lot of unwanted plant material there, sometimes overgrown with weeds. And then we would amend that soil locally, i.e. just where we're planting, with expanded shale. So we wouldn't necessarily excavate and remove soil like we might in an HOA development site. This is the cutest kid I know, except for my own. This is a pile of expanded shale gravel that we use, and Alden loves it. Hopefully, Beth, that means he's going to get dirty in your garden and help you get your plants going. Say,
Yeah.
hey, Alden, we can dig in and find this stuff.
He corrected me when I called it something different today. He said, "Mom, that's expanded shale."
Ah, good man. We've got a job for him. Removing lawn. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. The Resource Central is an organization out of Boulder, and part of their website, if you dig in deep enough, they've got a much more extensive explanation on how to, these 4 methods for removing an existing lawn. Basically, you can suffocate it, you can burn it, you can use chemicals, or you can manually remove it. And I'll leave it at that. That's homework for you guys to do. Like I said, Resource Central is a fantastic place to find like step-by-step instructions on how to execute any one of these lawn removal methods. Okay, so let's dive into some photos on Beth's project specifically. So the first thing we've done is we've removed all these plants that were unwanted. They were by and large not native. Many of them would have grown to be too large for the space, or they weren't spaced very well. They're just not designed and planned very well. It's quite frustrating. We've also manually removed the lawn in this tree lawn space And one way to get rid of a lawn, if you're going the manual method, is to, when you chip out Kentucky bluegrass lawn, it comes out in sheets or pieces of sod. We just flip them over. So that organic material can even stay there. If you dry out the roots, that plant will die. And you'll avoid the fear of having that plant poke its ugly head up later down the road.
Hey, Curtis, I have a quick question on that.
You bet.
There's other ways that I've seen out there for, shall we say, killing off that lawn grass, and I wasn't sure if you could, yeah, some of the. I mean, do you see the version you used as preferable to that over something like the sheet mulching or layering, just because it's best for the soil, or for what?
No, every method has its place, and every site is unique. The Resource Central is an organization in Boulder that's got a lot more information on these 4 methods and when might manual removal be a better option. The pros and cons basically of each option. I would dive in there. It is very site specific. I would say, please try to avoid using Roundup. That would be a chemical method that is not nature friendly. Some of these others are more intensive or take a longer amount of time or require a full sun environment. They all have pros and cons, but the Resource Central website is very good at outlining all that information.
I appreciate that. That's helpful. Thanks.
Yeah. Oh, no problem. We've got equipment, so for us to come in and remove the lawn here manually is not that hard. Plus, we're used to shovel work and pick work, so to do this by hand for us, pretty easy. For a lot of homeowners, this is a few weeks worth of work and some Advil, so everybody's also different in how they handle it. That's the equipment we have scraped. You can see the material we've generated. Not sustainable, folks. I know hauling this material is not ideal. Again, we're trying to think big picture here and get this garden right so that it is a success and it doesn't require further inputs and further machine work and further labor down the road. So it's just part of the deal for us. We've dug out 6 inches of soil here. And with that 6 inches and this piece of equipment came the lawn, right? And we are not finding Kentucky bluegrass roots growing deeper than 6 inches in most Colorado residential sites. Once we're 6 inches down, we till in, remember that pile of expanded shale that was sitting right here that Alden was so sweetly hugging? We've taken that material and tilled it into the ground below. We call that the subgrade. So we've amended the subgrade. And expanded shale has some special qualities that improve drainage, improve water retention, and provide habitat for microbiological activity. And so that we've improved this subgrade soil very significantly. And then we come in and we lay drip lines underneath all of these planted spaces. The benefit is we're not throwing any water into the air. So all of the water that is being used is being put directly into the ground where the plants can access it. So we're really looking at somewhere between 95 and 100% irrigation efficiency with a system like this, as opposed to the sprinkler system that you probably have on your lawns where a head pops up and sprays water everywhere. And some of that water sprays onto the sidewalk. A lot of it blows away. A lot of it evaporates off the leaf of the plant before the water's even gotten into the soil. So we're talking about, that's a roughly a 60 to 70% efficient type of irrigation system. To translate that to between 30 and 40% of the water that comes out of that nozzle does not feed a plant. That's pretty staggering amount of water loss, water inefficiency relative to drip irrigation like this, where we're basically all of the water that we're putting into the ground is beneficial to the root systems of these plants. This is what it looks like when it's running. So there are emitters embedded inside this tubing, and we get wet spots, and those wet spots expand and connect so that the entire soil profile gets wetted. Great photo, Beth. Okay, so just a brief kind of review of types of irrigation. What I just showed you was subsurface drip irrigation. Okay, the most efficient form of irrigation possible. The second type is point source drip emitters, or some people, that's what most people think of as drip irrigation. I'll show you a picture of that in a second. The third method would be overhead irrigation. That's what most of you are accustomed to seeing on your lawns, where a sprinkler head pops up and distributes water over the lawn. And then the last option is no irrigation. In Mother Nature we trust. I don't trust Mother Nature in that realm. I think that having an irrigation system is a pretty huge insurance policy. Yes, planting native plants should mean that we don't need to irrigate, but think about our aesthetic tolerances. You know, in Pawnee Buttes National Grassland, if there's a year where it receives very little water, just different plants thrive. And that is not the same environment as a residential landscape where, you know, we've put inputs in, we've put time and labor and hard-earned dollars into creating a landscape that's going to thrive. Trusting Mother Nature to deliver the right conditions for that is a little bit questionable. So I don't ever recommend a no irrigation landscape, even though in theory, if you use the right plants, it could work. It's definitely a gamble. So this is point source irrigation, where you have a drip tube. This is a drip emitter that regulates the amount of water that flows through this tube directly to a plant. Also very efficient, and this is how we irrigate all of our trees and shrubs. Okay, so in an area where we have a lot of plants smashed together, we use the subsurface irrigation, like I showed you with the picture where we have a lot of little wet spots that wets the entire soil. But in an area where we're going to use shrubs or larger plants, this is a very efficient way to water those specific plants. So we really, really, really strive to avoid this kind of irrigation. Like I said, especially with a system like this, I would guess that 40% of the water coming out of that nozzle is not watering a plant. Some of it's watering the lawn, a lot of it's blowing away or evaporating away. Some of it's watering ground between plants that will really only water a weed. So in Colorado, especially with our low humidity, it's a little bit foolish. Okay, so we're back at Beth's home, and we've been to the nursery. We made a big order of plants, and it's pretty fun when we start seeing green come in. You can see underneath all these trays of plants, the amended topsoil that we have imported and covered that entire drip irrigation system with. So this soil is as good as we can get. It's a great medium to plant. You can literally get on your hands and knees and with your hand scoop out a void and pop a plant in. You don't even need a shovel at this point. And so it makes planting very simple. And we always execute a design where we have our plants kind of figured out, blocks or groups or clusters of plants. In the design of it, there's movement, there's an idea about textures, where we're using grasses, where we're using ground covers. There's some rhyme and reason to it, but you kind of can't mess it up because the plants are all so amazing. Okay, so it's hard to believe, but next summer, you won't see very much soil in this landscape. These plants are going to get big, and they're going to get big fast because we've really helped that soil. We've opened up that soil and allowed for the root systems to develop very quickly. Another site preparation element that I think is really undervalued, but is so critical, is called is implementing rain gardens or water harvesting. So we all have roofs that collect water. All of those roofs distribute water to gutters and then to downspouts. And then in one way or another, those downspouts dump a bunch of water in every rain event. You know, thousands of gallons of water usually in a decent rainstorm. So a lot of people find that water to be a nuisance, and they're trying to find a way to get rid of it so it doesn't mess up their landscape. I think the flip psychology is where we need to think of, is let's actually slow that water down as it moves through the landscape so it actually enters the ground and becomes beneficial. So rain garden will use topography or create topography to slow the movement of water as it moves through the landscape and apply that water into the root zones of plants that we have. So free water. This is a good example of a rain garden. We've got a downspout here that comes into a pipe. We've got a downspout here that comes into a pipe. We've got a downspout here that catches water from about a quarter of the square footage of the house. And all that water comes out in this quote unquote basin. It's got a small, it's basically a dam with a small weir or an outlet. Water will then flow into this middle basin. It will fill up and then overflow into this lower basin. This will fill and it will flow out here. And finally, it gets to the public right away or the storm sewer system. Hopefully by that time, most of the water has actually gone into the ground and it's watering this tree and it's watering these plants. And these are plants that are designed to thrive in an environment that gets periodically soaked. This is, Beth, I think you took this picture during a rainstorm, yeah? Yeah, so you can see how wet this gets, it's muddy. That's a sign that this thing worked. It didn't all just flow directly to the sidewalk. So for some inspiration, I find this incredibly beautiful. We have almost no perennials in this landscape, but grasses do the heavy lifting in these gardens because they look good. Generally, they look good all 4 seasons. There's just a very short time where you might mow these grasses down and very quickly in the spring. That's very late winter. You would do that in the spring. It doesn't take long and they're up being beautiful again. So just look in the neighborhood. You're gonna catch glimpses of what is possible. These types of projects are going to become the norm. So people that are afraid of this kind of thing because they don't understand it, there's going to be more and more education and more of these types of landscapes developed that will just further the movement. We're starting to get programs where they will actually pay you to remove some irrigated Kentucky bluegrass lawn and replace it with something that is not Kentucky bluegrass lawn. Now here's your opportunity to take that money and go a step further and actually create a native garden that's even more beneficial. So it's not just about water savings or water conservation, but it's also about ecosystem health. And if you're interested, Beth has created a slick little website called ourprairiegarden.com, where she's got some more information that will help you in your journey to creating a regenerative biodiversity, a habitat. And I like to use the term nature TV. You're gonna want to sit out there, and if you just stay calm for 5 minutes, the life that your garden will support will become apparent. You maybe don't see it quite so obviously if you're walking by or if you're not kind of still for a minute, but as soon as you sit yourself down and just slow yourself down, you're going to realize how much life a garden like this sustains. It's really fun. Okay, so the next step in your projects, step 3, planting, design, and planting. This is the one that can be daunting, but I want to give you some bullet points to kind of mantras to think about. 1, nature abhors a vacuum. So I know plants can be expensive, but not planting something in a space is even more expensive. I would recommend starting with small plants, but packing them in. Yeah, you really want it to be so full that there is not room for an undesirable plant. And if you do that, you won't get undesirable plants. I promise. You can come back, you can call me on that one. So fill the garden. You want the plant canopies to overlap and compete a little bit so that sun cannot reach the soil. That's where weed seed will germinate, and all weed seed needs is sunlight and a little bit of water. And if you prevent that environment, then you won't have those undesirable plants. And then layer plants from the ground in the front of your garden. Start with lower plants, and as you work your way towards the back of the garden, you can get taller. So you're layering plants, you're presenting plants using plants as backdrops for plants so that there's interaction with texture and foliage and color. And then I know this goes counterintuitive. People are very, very focused on flowers, but I would recommend trying to at least see plants for something beyond flowers, because the native plants, the perennials that you'll probably be using, will only be in bloom for a few weeks. So if that is your penultimate goal in a garden, then you're using the wrong type of plant. You want to use annuals, which means you'd be planting this garden every year, which I don't know if that's sustainable for most folks. What plants offer that comes through all year round is texture, foliage color. Those are things that last 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 months out of the year. And excuse me, like a fine painting can keep the composition of your garden attractive, even when there aren't a lot of things in bloom. I kind of think of flowers, it's just sort of a bonus. You're never going to hate it if something blooms, but you're certainly going to love that garden if this grass played off of the leaf shape and the plant shape of this other plant. And that's next to a different thing that, for instance, maybe one plant is fountain shaped and one is mounded and one is creeping and one is very wild and wispy and irregular. Those plant forms next to and amongst themselves can be very interesting. It is a lot like painting. So think about the plant's interest even in the wintertime. Dormant and desiccant plants can be interesting. They can be colorful, and they can certainly and almost always are textural. Seed heads, I can't overstate the importance of seed heads, not only for the aesthetics of the garden and the plants in the garden, but for the forage for birds and other insects. When things get tough, if you've got plants that can provide food for these animals, you've really done a lot of work for them. Even plant debris is important. It provides habitat and forage for insects and birds. So these gardens are not about neatnik. A little bit of fussiness and a little bit of haphazard is probably a good thing for the ecosystem. I know for some people that's a little bit difficult to swallow, but we're all learning here. Mother Nature does not come in and clean up, and that's the model that we really need to hearken to. So plant forms, like I was describing, the shapes can be used to paint the garden. That's why the lawn to me is so boring. It's just, I don't know, there's just nothing to it. And if you have to have a lawn or the lawn look, consider native grass species alternative. Blue grama, buffalo grass, even dog tuff is a Bermuda grass clone, or a monoculture of ground cover like creeping thyme or veronica or sedum or any number of different plants. So here's a buffalo grass lawn that is really successful. Takes very little water, very infrequent mowing. This is a seeded blue grama front yard that looks like this. Blue grama is a plant that I think we should be using a lot more of. And Beth's side yard that tree lawn space between the street and the sidewalk will be seeded, and it will look like this. This is a residence that's nearly across the street from me, and I convinced this homeowner to seed blue grama. In the summertime, it's gorgeous. We water this once every 3 weeks. It's green and verdant. And then in the wintertime, we mow it, it turns dormant. And this is what it looks like dormant. And I think it's kind of a beautiful golden color. We do, as Coloradoans, if we're going to be into native plants, we need to start appreciating the browns and tans and bronzes and golds and copper and yellow. That's the color palette that we're working with, and you have to embrace that. There's beauty there. It's not New England, and it never will be. The close-up of this plant is moving into dormancy. You can see that there's spaces in between these plants. It's not a carpet like Kentucky bluegrass is, but it's a very successful plant. It's so low care and so beautiful. We've got these seed heads that I think are gorgeous. Is it hard to tell how I feel about blue grama? Okay, so the garden can be busy or it can be understated from a planting design perspective. Again, think about 4 seasons of interest. Think about what that plant will look like. The catalogs just show you what the flower looks like. You got to dig one step deeper. Okay. I want to just very, very quickly run you through some projects that I've done that will show you what these landscapes will look like. And so here's one, actually was executed in the Highlands. We've got clusters and groupings of native plants here. We have a rain garden here to catch water off of the downspout, and then more shrubs, trees, and more native plants on this side yard. This is what we started with. Too high, the soil is too high. It's 4 inches above the sidewalk height. So we need to cut some soil out of there. Full of weeds. The wrong plants, weedy trees, tree of heaven, Siberian elm, things like that just have to come out. The front yard is a bit of a mess, guys. I mean, let's just call it what it is. All right, we've done that process where we brought in some expanded shale. We've locally amended. We've tucked in a lot of plants here. The Netafim drip lines run underneath this entire garden space. This is all planted up. Now we did this project in early summer, so plant establishment was very quick. You can see the density of plants though. You can't skimp on the number of plants. 2 months later, this is what this garden looked like. We're still seeing some soil. There is some plant mortality. We never get 100% success with all the plants. So you've always got to come back in a month or two and tuck things into these empty spaces. You can see the rain garden. We've got these quote unquote dams with the cutout. So water flows from this basin to a lower basin. And it comes from these 2 downspouts. So I consider that a really successful project. We have seeded blue grama into some of this frontage space. They get a lot of dog traffic. We're not going to stop the dogs. So let's put a plant in there that can tolerate that. If the blue grama can tolerate bison, it can tolerate some dog traffic. Here's another space. This is probably my favorite and most indicative project because this is a new development HOA project, would be very similar to most of your landscapes. So we've got a driveway, city sidewalk. This is a corner lot, so it's a big front yard. And you can see how many plants we've designed into this. We've got a plant list here. We've done the excavation. We've run our Netafim subsurface drip irrigation. And we've planted this garden, and we're a couple weeks in here. So this is about 6 weeks after we planted it, and we are already just bustling with activity. This thing is full of pollinator plants, lots of texture. There's a lot going on. It's gorgeous. This is what stops people on the street. And then I want you to notice this plant. This is a penstemon, because this is highlighted in the winter landscape. You can see how gorgeous this is. This is one plant, all these blooms, great texture. We've got a narrow tree lawn here, that lawn space between the sidewalk and the street. We just continued this planting scheme and this idea of native, tough, low water, pollinator friendly plants all the way down the sidewalk. Can't tell me that somebody wouldn't be walking their dog and wasn't moved by this landscape. Now, whether or not they loved it or hated it or found themselves somewhere in between, we're affecting how people see the developed landscape. This is the winter landscape. Truth be told, I like this more than this. I don't know, call me weird, but it really strips it down to the bones. We're really looking at texture. And then that plant that I asked you to note is this one right here. The leaves are purple, just a striking magenta purple in the wintertime. The photo doesn't even do it justice. But look at how much is going on there. This is like January. This isn't even November. This is dead winter. And I think it's not everybody's gonna love that, and I accept that, but I do. Sorry, unapologetic apology there. I think it's awesome. You get closer, you've got copper, you've got gold, you've even still got some green, you got some russet. You know, there's just so much happening. There's that plant again. Now, I don't know. So my question is, which do you like better? You know, maybe it's a toss up. And then the last garden I want to show you is, this is a big landscape, much bigger than most of the landscapes in your area, but it's nitty gritty. Getting it done takes some perseverance. Not gonna lie, this is not a weekend project, especially in a landscape like this. Starts off small, diminutive, and sort of unimpressive. You gotta stay with it. Because later that year, this is what it looks like. Full of texture. And then later that fall, this is what it looks like. It's just so not like any of the neighbors, and it's so good for the environment that it's really hard to it's hard to understand why folks wouldn't want something like this. And this is in their backyard, another garden. This is not quite as native, but still a heck of a lot better than just blanketing, carpeting the whole area with Kentucky bluegrass. And then there's a few other pictures from other sites. These are really small gardens, folks. You know, this is 8 to 10 feet wide and 20 feet long. And you can do this and make a huge impact even in a very small postage stamp size side yard or backyard. Different style. This one uses expanded shale for mulch. Same site, both pictures. And that was it. Okay, so in closing, one, thank you for being here. Mark, thank you for hosting. Beth, thank you for being so passionate, getting me in front of this video and in front of you guys that are watching this. And Mark, I really hope that you get a lot of interest and a lot of hits on YouTube. I'd invite I don't know how to connect the loop. If there's further questions or further conversation or discussion to have following this presentation, Mark, maybe you can speak to how that typically works. I'm open to having a dialogue, whether that's through email or phone calls or a follow-up question and answer. I don't know. I'll leave that in your court.
I was going to suggest two things if we're open to it. One would be, first, if anybody has any questions now, feel free to unmute and ask. But the second part I was going to say is we'd love to see what Beth's garden looks like over the next summer or next year, and sort of track these kinds of things over time so that people can see what it grows into. Because that's, having lived in this house for 17 years, that's one of the things that I learned is, and you touched on it well, is it's one thing to see what it looks like when they put it in a picture and a rendering or whatever. It's another thing to see what happens when that shrub becomes fully grown and now takes up all of the space in the area between the fence and the house or something like that, as opposed to the half that space that it used to take up. And seeing it over time, I think, would be really really helpful for folks to kind of track it, maybe in 6 or 9 months, and then maybe again look at it the next year or something like that.
You bet. I can speak for Beth. I'm sure she'd be happy to have you walk by every day.
Yeah. So our house is right across from Willow Bark Park. So anybody who wants to stop by, I'm usually home, and if I'm in the yard, can see through the fence, and I'll come chat with you. I could chat about this stuff all day. I've learned a lot, and I want people to see it. So we have the website, ourprairiegarden.com. I put a QR code sign on the fence because I want people to understand the why of what we did. And but yeah, come see it over time. And I definitely would love to do like a follow-up session next summer or whenever people want to.
Am I on unmute? I can't even find it anymore. Can you hear my voice?
We got you, Catherine. Yep.
Okay. Did you have to get any kind of special permission to change anything in that tree lawn area?
So the things that we looked at were City of Denver and MCA. So City of Denver, we're lucky because we have a ton of latitude. There really isn't anything dictating what plantings you have. MCA, the main thing that they were looking at with our project, there were, I think, like six check boxes that we needed to look at. And the one that we needed to check was that we were moving our fence as part of our project. That was the thing that they wanted to make sure we weren't putting the fence closer to the alley. And so on our house, we moved the fence forward. It's like between 6 and 8 feet. So, and if you walk by currently, you can see where that is. Let's see if we can.
I think I'm back to the original slide. You can see the fence moving.
Yeah. So the fence moved forward. So we increased the size of our side yard. But that was the only thing that needed approval formally. So yeah, the tree lawn, it's the homeowner's responsibility for maintaining it. But yeah, if you spend a lot of time around Central Park, tons of people have done tons of different things. I think there is a preference for plants over people who replace what's there with rock. But yeah, that's the only thing that was looked at.
Good.
So yeah, I'm really excited to see that space on the right when we seed it next spring and see those grasses start popping up.
I have one question. I have one question about the grass that you were recommending. I forget what it was called already. Was it grava or something like that? I wasn't sure how well it does. I'm guessing well, but I wasn't sure how that does in, shall we say, tree lawns that get really hot because there's so much concrete and roadway around them. Does it get killed off, or does it do okay?
No, it's quite incredible. There's so many plants that don't mind that hot environment. And in fact, soil temperature is an important component to plant plant health and development. And some plants, like for instance, if you ever have tried to grow tomatoes, you know that warming up your soil will boost growth for tomatoes. And it's similar for blue grama. It's a warm season grass. So the warmer that soil gets, the sooner that plant will come out of dormancy. And because it's a plant that will thrive with very little irrigation, it doesn't mind being hot. It's quite, there's a whole nother lecture on grasses and types of grasses. There's some very interesting botanical differences between some of the grasses. And blue grama is a grass that's classified as a warm season grass. Generally, any warm season grass is going to thrive in a heat island like that. It just really doesn't care. It's pretty awesome.
We have a lot of blue grama in the parkways along Prairie Meadow Park also. As you walk around the neighborhood or exploring, I just think we're so lucky with the plants that we have in our parks. A lot of them are really, if it's not Kentucky bluegrass, there has been, when the neighborhood was developed, there was such a huge emphasis on native plants. I'm trying to learn identifying all of them, but I know a few, and even the sledding hills at Prairie Meadows Park, that's all buffalo grass. There's a lot of blue grama. So you can see it. It's right along the street, in between the street and the sidewalk. So it's kind of a proof of concept there.
It's a slam dunk, Barry.
Curtis, this has been awesome. I just put my contact information in the chat. We're meeting next Monday or Tuesday, I forget. And I'm going to make everyone watch this, and we'll be talking to you.
Wonderful. Well, I'm here for you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm just so excited that this concept is coming to the forefront. Anyway, end of comment.
Okay. Well, we're just the wave is just slowly building. I mean, the writing on the wall with what will be happening with water in the next 5 years, I'm thinking it speaks volumes that the state government is willing to pay you to change your landscape. That is just unprecedented. The water providers, Denver Water, Northern Water Conservation District, they look at Castle Rock, Aurora. They're all feeling a massive pinch and quite a scare. I think they're all scrambling pretty hard to figure out how we're going to handle water scarcity. And so residential landscape irrigation is low-hanging fruit in terms of water usage and opportunity for savings. And we're just getting into it. So it's kind of fun because what's happening with water is driving a bigger movement. I think that there's groundswell for water conservation, and then there's groundswell because of, mostly honestly, honeybees have gotten a lot of publicity. And when you put those together and then you start connecting the dots and you start thinking more about native plants and more about ecosystems, that it's not just about one species, that this world only works if it works for everything. And I think we're just starting to, it is very cool. I'm excited.
Yeah, Curtis, I hope we have 5 years, because I think it's going to take that long to get the message out. But thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
All right, with that, I think we'll call it a night. Thank you again for the presentation. I think it's going to be great to see how this evolves and grows. And thanks again. And I'll be in touch when it's probably a good time to try to look at how everything's grown in. I think it'll be great for everyone to see.
Thanks, Mark. Sounds great to me. Thanks, Beth.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you both.